All I ask is that today you do the best work of your entire life. Inventor, entrepreneur, and designer. Even these three words fall short to describe this man completely. The co-founder of the Apple company as well as the man who revolutionized Pixar. Steve Jobs is one of the biggest names that played a major role in bringing us the technology that we have today. But how did the school prankster and a relentless kid become such a respectable name in the history books? You're watching Life Story Inc. and this is the biography of Steve Jobs. Prologue. If we need to talk about how far Jobs walked in his life and how he changed so many lives across the globe, your starting point needs to be somewhere around 40 years earlier. The 80s and the 90s were times when people started playing with technology. The World Wide Web, the first text message, Windows, Google, Apple, Microsoft, all of them started writing their stories during this era. The idea of having a personal computer for ordinary people seemed absurd at the time. The world of technology had immense potential, but inevitably it also had one other thing that made many people blow out of the race at a neck-breaking competition. Quite obviously, Steve Jobs wasn't one of them at all. Childhood and early life. Born in 1955 to parents who gave him up for adoption, Jobs lived with his adoptive family in Mountain View, California, in the area that we know today as Silicon Valley. As a boy, Jobs and his father worked on electronics in the family garage. Paul, his adoptive father, showed his son how to take apart and reconstruct electronics, a hobby that instilled confidence, tenacity, and mechanical prowess in the young boy. When Steve Jobs was 6 years old, his young next-door neighbor found out he was adopted. "That means your parents abandoned you and didn't want you," she told him. Jobs ran into his home, where his adoptive parents reassured him that he was theirs and that they wanted him. "You were special. We chose you out. You were chosen." This is what they told their son, who certainly remembered this forever and made it a life motto. While Jobs was always an intelligent and innovative thinker, his youth was riddled with frustration and complaints about formal schooling. He was a prankster in elementary school due to boredom, and his fourth-grade teacher needed to bribe him to study. But why would a kid who surpassed everyone in his class sit quietly at his seat? Jobs performed incredibly well despite his shenanigans. So well that administrators wanted to skip him ahead to high school, a proposal that his parents declined. Failure and rejection. Looking from a different perspective, Jobs was his own competition. No matter how incredibly talented he was, the man was restless, extremely restless. His teenage years were a roller coaster of activities, each different from the earlier. After completing high school, Jobs enrolled at Reed College in Portland, Oregon. Lacking direction, he dropped out of college after 6 months and spent the next 18 months dropping on and taking more creative classes at school. A few years later, he took a position as a video game designer at Atari. But as anyone would have expected, he didn't stick around. Within a few months, he left the place, packed his bags, and went off to find spiritual enlightenment in India, traveling further and experimenting with psychedelic drugs. Family life. Even though he was one of the most famous CEOs there ever have been, Jobs kept his private world, his family, his long-lost sister, his adoptive and birth parents hidden from the headlines. He was married to Laureen Powell for over 20 years, and the couple had 3 children, Reed Paul, Erin Sienna, and Eve. Before the marriage, he did play the field quite a bit. He had a daughter, Lisa Brennan Jobs, with his high school girlfriend, Chris Ann Brennan, many years ago. However, Jobs didn't acknowledge Lisa as his daughter until several years later, though he kept quite a lot of communication with his long-lost biological sister, Mona Simpson. Jobs rebuffed his biological father to the end. Jobs' biological father had emailed his son a few times in a tentative effort to make contact, to which Jobs never responded. The biological father never called the son because Jobs would think that the dad who had given him up was now after his fortune. Turning point. In the autumn of 1974, Jobs reconnected with Stephen Wozniak, his old-time friend. The two of them used to get together to hook up digital chips and talk about electronics. So it wasn't surprising that they got their heads together when Wozniak told Jobs of his progress in designing his own computer logic board, especially after Hewlett Packard formally turned down Wozniak's design. They funded their entrepreneurial venture by Jobs selling his Volkswagen bus and Wozniak selling his beloved scientific calculator. What came was the Apple I, which earned the Apple Corporation around $774,000. Jobs was quick to understand that the idea of personal computers was not to be thrown away, and they soon designed an improved model, the Apple II, complete with a keyboard, and they arranged to have a sleek, moduled plastic case manufactured to enclose the unit. The machine was an immediate success, becoming synonymous with the boom in personal computers. In 1981, the Apple company had a record-setting public stock offering, and in 1983, it made the quickest entrance into Fortune 500 list of America's top companies. This was followed by Jobs' brainchild, Macintosh, which had even superior performance. But things took a bad turn when he couldn't quickly fix the problems arising due to incompatibilities Mac was facing, and the then CEO John Sculley, who was a former CEO of Pepsi, began to phase Jobs out. The differences between Jobs and John Sculley grew, and on one day Jobs was moved to a non-executive position in a board meeting. Disappointed, Jobs left Apple in 1985. But you and I both know that he wasn't a man who would just sit and whine. He soon began a new hardware and software enterprise called Next Inc. The company struggled in its attempt to sell its specialized operating system to mainstream America. Meanwhile, things weren't looking good for Apple. There weren't any new products coming to make the market happy, and thus financial losses were increasing, and during the same time, IBM's PC was dominating the office space with the launch of the Microsoft Windows operating system, and Apple failed to make an efficient operating system. Apple eventually bought Next Company in 1996 for $429 million. In 1997, Jobs returned to his position as Apple's CEO and took some drastic steps to turn the company around. Jobs summoned Apple's top employees to the auditorium and, wearing shorts and sneakers, got up on stage and asked everyone to tell him, "What's wrong with this place?" After some murmurings and uncertain responses, Jobs got everyone off. "It's the product. So what's wrong with the products? The products suck. There is no sex in them anymore." And that's because while Jobs left Apple, it started to lose its iconic status, which was a brand of Steve Jobs' influence. Prices went up and Mac suddenly stopped selling. The product lineup was so fragmented that it was incredibly difficult to tell the difference among the models. This not only bewildered customers but also sales executives, and Apple's brand image was damaged in the process. Jobs took steps to put Apple back on track. In 1997, Macworld Expo, Jobs announced that Apple and Microsoft would be entering into a partnership with a commitment to release MS Office for Mac, as well as a $150 million investment. As well as Apple and Microsoft agreed to settle a long-standing dispute over patents. Steve Jobs used the money to accelerate the advertising and highlight the products Apple already offered, while cutting off R&D fund in non-producing areas. One of Jobs' first moves as new acting CEO was to develop the iMacs, which brought Apple time to restructure. The iMac became a smashing hit, moving about 1 million units each year. It also helped reintroduce Apple to the media and public and showcase the company's new emphasis on design and aesthetics. Through Steve Jobs' guidance, the company grew sales significantly with the introduction of the iMac and other new products. Their appealing designs and powerful marketing worked well for Apple. Jobs was very good at giving the presentations, grabbing the audience attention, and keeping them excited throughout his keynote presentation. Steve Jobs went on to introduce revolutionary products like iPod, an MP3 player which revolutionized the music industry and was an instant hit; iPhone, a revolutionary smartphone which changed the way we use mobile phones today. People were so excited to buy this phone, they even waited for 2 days in front of the store to get their hands on it. iPad. Though criticized to be a large iPhone by certain tech enthusiasts, it was a hit. Apple sold about 1 million iPads in less than half of the time it took for the iPhone sales, becoming one of the fastest-selling products at that time. Legacy. Steve Jobs died on October 5, 2011, of pancreatic cancer. He left one of the most astounding legacies. Steve not only changed electronics, but he also created a different way to create movies. His founding and works with Pixar, an animation company, had made such an impact with children and families. To summarize his accomplishments and the impact that he made, Steve Jobs revolutionized the music industry, smartphones, personal computing, animated movies, retailing, and the digital publishing industries, inspiring the world to be great. What can we learn from his life story? Steve Jobs was a different kind of person. His life story teaches us to take risks, travel the world, and learn there is no end to how many new things a person can learn if they want to. The man taught everyone that there is nothing powerful than passion. If you keep doing what you love, you will strive for greatness. Jobs' attention to detail on his creations was unrivaled. Though he was a technologist and a businessman, he was also an artist and designer. The biggest reason why he excelled as an entrepreneur was that his obsessiveness for perfection and being very good at pitching ideas and giving presentations. As Jobs said, stay hungry and stay foolish. What did you learn from his life story? Mention in the comments below. If you loved the video, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Watch the incredible life stories of other entrepreneurs by clicking on the playlist below.